Well, now that they are finally out in the wild and available across all major carriers, I'm sure those of you looking at Samsung's new devices are asking yourselves, which one is better for me? Well, it's time to find out because it's Joshua Vergara from Android Authority. What's going on, everybody? And this is the Samsung Galaxy S6 versus the Samsung Galaxy S6 Edge. From a design perspective, you're obviously looking at two main aspects that differentiate these two devices: the curves on either side of the screen in the case of the S6 Edge. This is all complete with the same tactile home button and button layouts for both devices, as well as the camera package on the back accompanied by the heart rate monitor. Both devices now have a glass backing as well, eliminating the removable back and the features implied underneath that were in previous Samsung devices. Though the S6 is a tiny bit taller and only a few grams heavier than the S6 Edge, these differences are largely negligible. What makes the case for the S6 Edge in design are indeed its slopes on the right and left portions of the screen, and the real difference has to be felt to be believed. As I mentioned after my unboxing, what really made sense of the Edges to me was the fact that they come down to meet the palm, hence making side-to-side handling better, perhaps better than any other slab device. For gripping the sides, a very prominent lip in the metal frame tilts down ever so slightly, but mainly sticks out from behind the screen that melts right down over it. So with a good pinch, there weren't any problems keeping the phone in check without triggering the screen accidentally. However, this can't really be said for landscape usage, as I did find it a little tough to hold a device on the edges without a little bit of fidgeting, but this was really a rare occurrence. In reality, the width of these devices is very much the same, but with the screen coming down on either end, the S6 Edge actually feels more narrow, and that is what makes all the difference. Yes, it will be the S6 Edge that ultimately turns heads. While the S6 proper looks more like a Galaxy Xperia mashup, the S6 Edge will look even better to the tech-savvy and will become more recognizable to the common consumer as it stays on the market. So if handling is more of a big deal to you, then the S6 Edge is an experience that has to be felt, and we're pretty certain that it's going to stick with you. Now, the same sentiment can be given to the displays, as the curves of the S6 Edge happen to add to the viewing experience as well. Specifications are as high as you would expect for a new flagship by Samsung, with the highly vivid 5.1-inch Super AMOLED display now coming in at Quad HD resolutions and super high pixel densities. The result in either device is a colorful, sharp experience that has yet to miss a beat in work, play, and media consumption. What makes the S6 Edge so compelling is the fact that its screen is essentially one entity and doesn't have any specific area sectioned off for the Edge capabilities. Though we will get into the actual Edge screen features in the software section, it's worth mentioning that they only take up one side of the display that you choose, and even then they only appear when you specifically trigger them. It's as if Samsung finally figured out that the Edges aren't really made for game-changing features, but rather for a new way of looking, literally, at a device. As such, elements of Android material design are given an auxiliary effect, a roll-in effect that isn't always noticed, but appreciated every time that it is. Watching media in landscape mode makes the heads-up notifications look even better because they have this effect, for example. And even then, the Edges don't move any of the frame away from your viewpoint. Again, they are really there for aesthetics, convenience, and the few features that actually mostly stay out of the way. In performance, Samsung has decided to forego the Snapdragons of the world and put out its in-house Exynos processor, and to great effect. The Exynos 7420 is backed by Mali T76 MP8 graphics and 3GB of RAM, though it is also worthy of mention that the built-in storage benefits from a UFS 2.0 flash memory construction that helps keep things as optimized as possible. This is a case that has been made against expandable storage because it just won't be able to keep up with the installed storage. The only real stutter that we've ever seen involves the Flipboard Power briefing screen, which typically has to refresh every time you swipe to it, and it can slow down your immediate return to the home screens and back. All tasks move along with little consequence, even if you're trying to do them at the same time with the multi-window or even the S-window capabilities. But perhaps the best way of feeling this speed is to go to the old-school method of jumping between applications via the recent app screen. Few problems came up with gaming too, though with the most intensive applications we did notice the phone getting quite warm, it was not to the point of discomfort. And with that, the performance aspect is pretty much tied here, which is simply a benefit for anyone that chooses either of these phones. In hardware, the biggest story since the announcement of these phones has been the removal of the replaceable batteries and expandable storage, though I did say earlier that Samsung's case for the fastest flash memory possible makes a bit of sense. Both phones still sport the usual bells and whistles, including the fingerprint reader embedded in the home button, and that now vertical heart rate sensor that, in our testing, works a little faster than previous editions found on Samsung smartphones. Connectivity with LTE networks has been very steady on either device, and the voice calls are about as good as they've ever been. And the sound coming from the now bottom-mounted speaker is pretty adequately loud no matter which version of these phones you get. Battery life on either device remains pretty standard, despite the claims of going beyond due to better processing. In my estimation, the higher resolution seemed to even out whatever optimizations were put into the processors. But of course, it always comes back for the S6 Edge to the edges on the screen. Now, while they don't really add anything to the hardware section, I do have to say that some of the accessories for the S6 Edge will turn out a little bit different from its original counterpart. But as far as the features go, the Edge screen features are going to be covered in the software section. But I will mention that the night clock, especially when you have it triggered for bedtime, works really well on the nightstand, but ultimately that is still just a small addition. Now, my camera shootout that was just recently published will show the camera quality shared between these devices even better, but it can be restated that the camera package Samsung put out this year is the best they've ever put out, and probably one of the best in Android right now. A rear-facing f1.9 aperture camera brings auto HDR to 16 megapixel photos with a laundry list of capabilities, while the front-facing camera also sports those same specifications but at 5 megapixels. The app comes with a number of different modes, including panorama, slow-motion video capture at 120 frames per second, and can be easily triggered with a double tap of the home button, which is one of the best felt enhancements of this Galaxy update. Using these cameras in all but the lowest light in mostly indoor situations yields some really great looking photos, and especially with a very good working auto mode, most of the guesswork is taken out of the smartphone photography experience. Extra features are available if needed, but for the general user who just wants to capture high quality memories, both of these devices are great companions to have. Maybe we haven't really looked at it in this particular lens, per se, but smartphone cameras for a while were struggling to get to the point of replacing even typical point-and-shoot devices. With this new crop of flagship smartphones, I think we're closer than ever to doing that, and this new Galaxy line is a prime example of that evolution. As has been mentioned a few times already, the TouchWiz iteration on this line of Galaxy devices has been toned down to the pleasure of many, including us here at Android Authority. Not only have many of the gimmicks been put aside, any ones that have been left in don't get all up in your face about using them. Even tutorials about how to use different features are largely absent, and if you want to keep certain features like S-Voice on the side, that is actually very easy to do this time around. Despite a still pretty colorful aesthetic, a theme engine can be used to change the look of TouchWiz to what you prefer. So with all of that aside, it's better to look at what makes the S6 Edge different, and it is the return of those Edge panels. These panels and features don't show up until you trigger them, which happens only from a standby position via a couple of swipes on the side that is picked by the user. The night clock comes up, and then you can swipe from the bottom portion to see notifications, news tickers, and a number of other edges that can be installed via the settings. Despite some usefulness that can be had in the news tickers, the scrolling generally focuses on one story at a time, and thus pales in comparison to even using the briefing screen instead. Now, it can be a good way of looking at your notifications quickly, but waking the phone up and seeing them on the lock screen right there is arguably still faster and better to do. And then finally, there's the People Edge, which houses 5 people under specific colors for easy access for calls and messages. While it can work as a pretty good speed dial, the main gripe I had with it was that messages required the use of the native messaging app instead of something like Hangouts, which I use all the time. And while the phone is upside down, the color assigned to a contact will glow on the side as they're calling you, alerting you to who exactly is calling in an interesting way. It's not really a bad idea, but then again, when you have your phone screened down on a table, it honestly just looks like the underside of an import tuner car. And even then, who really puts their phone face down on a surface in fear of actually scratching the thing? Ultimately, the main story here is how TouchWiz has been optimized and made even faster, especially when you consider the processing package made in-house that Samsung has put within these devices. The Edge screen features are available for anyone who really needs them, but ultimately I don't think there are many people out there who feel that way. And finally, the price, where we find that paying for sloped screens means a premium. Indeed, the S6 Edge will cost you up to $150 more overall for the unlocked version, or the same amount broken up into higher payments per month on various carrier plans. It's no secret that flagship devices come at high prices, but would you pay even more for a phone that basically just looks and somewhat feels a little different? That's the question you'll have to answer, because both of these phones really show that Samsung has leapt forward in the flagship game. The Galaxy S6 and the S6 Edge will be the phones to beat this year, and when factoring in the speed and stellar camera experience, it will take quite a bit to get ahead of the Korean giant. But in the case of picking the S6 Edge over the S6, it's really a matter of aesthetics and handling, both of which are actually felt benefits. And if you're looking for a phone that is ultimately a looker, unique to everyone including the actual user themselves, and quite a head-turner, then the S6 Edge might be worth that extra money. Personally, if I had a choice, the S6 Edge would be my pick, but I still hesitate to say that the S6 Edge Edition should have been the only phone Samsung released this year. That's because if I had the Galaxy S6, I still have largely the same experience, but at a somewhat lower price point. But at least in this Versus, we get to see how Samsung has reconciled the past, almost perfected the present, and where they might continue to be ahead of the curve in the future. As always, thank you guys very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this Versus between the Samsung Galaxy S6 and the S6 Edge. Yes, we're talking about two devices that are essentially the same, but the little differences in the S6 Edge might be enough to put it over the top for you. They certainly do for us here at Android Authority. If you want to see the full reviews of the Galaxy S6 and the S6 Edge, you can find them right over on the side, and then go into the description below so you can find even more links to things like the camera shootout so you can see even more about these phones. Keep it tuned to Android Authority for even more on Samsung's brand new flagships, for future flagships coming, as we have some events coming up in the next month or so. And then drop us some likes on our videos, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, listen to our podcast, the Friday Debate Podcast, and then when you're done with all of that, don't forget to head on over to AndroidAuthority.com, because we are your source for all things Android.